Welcome to another episode of the Straight Up Chicago Investor Podcast. I'm 𝗤𝘃𝗀𝗃. With me, as always, is Mark Ainley. Mark, how are we doing over there this morning?
Books. I can't believe if the 18-year-old version of me would have said I hit 60 books in a year of reading. Like I would have probably I would call myself a bunch of dorky names. But man, I've gone through a whole bunch of books, and I know you came across a book this week. Kind of tell us about it.
Sure, I'll talk about a book. Yeah, I actually found one at the library. Now that it's getting cold out, we can't take the kids to the park, so that's how we kill time. But yeah, I found one, Blueprint for Disaster, The Unraveling of Chicago Public Housing. It is written by an academic, so it's a little dry, but it's great. It's filled with a ton of content. The quick 1-minute summary, they talk about just how all these major projects failed, like all, the Cabrini Greens of the world, why they didn't fail and what they should have done. It's just fascinating, like all the mistakes that were made and all the Monday morning quarterback decisions. The low cost mandates from public officials was a huge part of this. That's how you end up with these, oppressive looking buildings with just no character. They talk about the lack of community. They talk about how they strive to meet those in need first, as opposed to, the working class that would have provided some subsidy. They talk about how being 100% subsidized is not sustainable. You can't upkeep the building. And then they give some crazy examples too, 2 elevators for 900 residents, type of things. So it's awesome. It's an awesome book written by a Chicago dude, Brad Hunt, who's at Loyola University. Mark, I think you need to read the book. I think we need to get him on the show. I think it'd be a good one.
It'd be a good one. I read not too long ago that High Risers, which is all about the story about Cabrini Green, and some of those things were just so amazing. Of the construction, they really jacked that up. And then Cabrini Green, this is something I had no clue. For the most of its existence, it was only partially filled. So, I mean, with so many different families on the program, it was maybe at 60% occupancy at best at any given time.
Yeah, they talk about some of just the incompetence of. I mean, he doesn't really mince words on it. It's pretty good. It's a pretty good attack on wow, this was poorly ran. These were all the mistakes that were made. It's it's really eye opening. Oh my God, what could have been and what happened. It's 2 different stories.
Nice.
So it's cool if you're into that stuff, into urban planning. A little dry, but I highly recommend it.
Great.
All right, what do we got for the housing provider tip of the week?
Housing provider tip. I read in an article a couple of days ago that the city of Chicago has upped the landlord violation of the heating ordinance to $1,000. Up until most of you landlords are good landlords and should never get that fine. And we've never gotten that fine, but keep this in mind. There's a lot of landlords that are not rushing to do maintenance these days because maybe their tenant didn't pay or maybe they're slow paying, and you can't do that, especially in the city of Chicago with heat. If they call 311 and you come out and the heat's not sufficient, which they could usually do within the same day, 24 hours, they're going to be out there. You could get slapped with that $1,000 fine and have to go to court. So make sure you're on top of your no heat calls. City of Chicago has these specific temperatures that you have to have your house between 8 o'clock at night and 6 o'clock in the morning. And then there's daytime temperatures as well too. So make sure we'll put the link to that. So you have the full heating ordinance. So you have that. So just make sure that you're responding fast. You're being responsive to no heat issues. If you don't have a good HVAC guy, make sure you have on speed dial going into the winter, because especially, we always know there's those 2 or 3 weeks out of the winter that are just brutal. And that's usually when the no heat issues come up.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. We got a good one today. I know we always say that, but this is this is a different one. If you remember, we had Joey's episode on. We talked about his first house hack and all the challenges he faced. And it was well received. There were a lot of questions and follow-ups from that. So we have a similar episode today. We don't have a tenant stealing cars or anything crazy, but a look into a first house hack that included a gut rehab. So I'm going to dive into that and a lot to learn here, both whether you're new or experienced. So today's guest, a full-time engineer, also a licensed real estate agent with Century 21. We're going to talk about his first house hack property, a 3-unit that required a full gut renovation. So without further ado, Alex Martinez, welcome to the show. Alex, how are we doing this morning?
I'm good, Tom and Mark. Thank you guys for having me. I know we've talked a lot off air. We just recently met for the first time at the event, the 100th episode recording. So never imagined that I'd be on here, but here I am, and hopefully I can share some good nuggets to take Mark's word with the listeners.
There we go. See the silver lining. If you just take on a crazy project, regardless of how it ends up, you get to be on the podcast. So just have that in the back of your mind when you're making decisions.
Yep.
So, all right. So Alex, let's start square one here. Out of all the neighborhoods you ended up buying near the United Center, talk us through, were you looking at other areas? How did you end up there? Where were you looking? How did you hone in on that specific area? What attracted you?
So the reason I ended up there was because, as you mentioned, I'm licensed with 𝗦𝘁𝗶𝗵𝗵 SGR. Last May of 2020, we all the agents within 𝗦𝘁𝗶𝗵𝗵 got an email for an in-house listing. So I guess one of the perks of being an agent, if you happen to be at a brokerage that's got some deal flow within them. So I got the email for this 2-unit row house right off of Madison and Western, not too far, 3 blocks away from the United Center. And I thought to myself, this wasn't an area I had ever looked in because I didn't know a ton about it. I had heard that anything, if you're familiar with that area, basically anything east of Western is kind of already sort of expensive. And I didn't think the numbers could work out there. But after looking at the asking price, which was $325, it's a full gut rehab. But then I started doing my research, started looking at the comps, started for the sales comps and the rental comps. And I kind of determined, I'm like, you know what, this actually could work out. As we're going to get into in a bit, I was working with a GC who was kind of helping me with estimates, and that sort of what gave me the confidence to pull the trigger in this particular area. It wasn't my initial plan. I had was looking in all sorts of areas. Initially was looking in, Mark, I think I was working with Kristen at your office. So we were trying to get a HUD property in Englewood, buy it cash. I was looking in North Lawndale to buy some cash, but ultimately after I met my loan officer, 𝗵𝘃𝗶𝗵𝗵, he kind of advised me on some products that I could do low money down, anywhere from 3.5 with FHA to even 15% down, which I ended up doing with conventional. And that's what sort of opened my buying power to some more established areas such as this one. I was looking in Bronzeville, Irving Park, Humboldt, but I ended up here in the United Center.
How long were you looking for? So give us kind of that time frame from the day when you kind of were like, you know what, I'm going to go buy something till the day you actually close. Like what's that time period? And how much of like money and figuring out how to finance it, how much of that was like the delay in doing it faster?
Yeah. So, okay, to answer your first question, how long was I looking for? So I got licensed at the end of 2019. I thought that this was going to be a way of sort of forcing myself to really dive into it full steam and, get into it there. But I started looking at the beginning of 2020, right? Like sort of pre-pandemic. And then I spent about almost 6 months. I got this property under contract at the end of May. So almost 5 months or so, looking at some other properties in other areas, swinging and missing, the usual frustrations of newer investor, especially as the market was starting to get kind of hot. So yeah, it was about a 5-month time frame that I was looking for before I got this property under contract. It did take a while to close because there was a bunch of, I think we're going to talk a little bit about the due diligence process, but there was just some things to handle there. So I didn't end up closing on this property until September. So it was about a 2.5, 3 month closing process period.
Got it. So Alex, walk us through, you say, I want to see this building. You show up the first time to walk it. Just what is it like on that block? Like going through the neighborhood because you weren't familiar with it. What did you feel like going through and saying, okay, there's development already happening? Were you more excited or less excited, when you pull a car up and say, okay, this is where it's at?
I was more excited because as I got to the block, I noticed, it didn't, even though this property was distressed, there weren't really any vacant lots, no other properties with signs of distress such as this one. As you drive up and down the blocks, there's new construction, condo developments and rehab all over the place. You're literally in no traffic, 5 minutes away from downtown. My house is behind Pete's Fresh Market, so grocery store right there. The UC is obviously, United Center is obviously right there, close proximity to the expressways, to UIC, just a ton of reason why it made sense that, people are already talking about that this area is up and coming. But again, given the price point, what I calculated to be the rehab cost, rents, it made sense. Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised with what I saw in the area.
Okay. And so we like it. You run your rehab numbers, you back into, yep, this will work for me. Was there anything special around the negotiations? You said it took 2.5 months or a longer period to close. Talk us through, one, what was that delay? And two, was there a bunch of going back and forth? Or was it pretty smooth to get to agreement?
Yeah, so I guess the first thing that came up that caused a bit of a delay and some chaos in the transaction was that I had brought up to my lender, Perry, that I noticed that I saw some demo court activity in the city inspection records. So the moment I brought that up to him, he said, hey, let's push to order title on the front end, even though a lot of the times that's done sort of on the back end, closer to closing, because if it shows that there's a demo order on the property, then we can't lend on it. So we went ahead and did that. Sure enough, it came back showing that there was a demo court on a demo order on the title. So my attorney was able to go back and forth with the lender and the other side, and we got to a resolution. Long story short, the title policy was able to insure over the demo order. I had to sign a document. I forget what the official name of the document was, but basically saying that if I didn't complete the rehab, if the property were to get demolished because of my inability to follow through with the rehab and cure all the violations and have that demo order removed, then it'd be on me to sort of, it'd be on me if the property were to get demolished. I wouldn't be covered over that. And again, to me, I took on the gut rehab, right? I was, if you could ask, why did I do that for my first project? It was sort of, I call it like ignorant fearlessness. This was another one where I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to do it, right? Like, there's no way I'm not going to be able to do it. Of course, I'll sign. So there it was again. So I signed that. That caused a bit of a delay, but we were able to get around that with the title policy insuring over that demo order. Another thing that caused some delay during the due diligence process was that I was working with 𝗬𝗵𝗶𝗵𝗁, my architect, previous guest as well. I know you've worked with him, Tom.
You just mentioned my whole team here. Keep going.
Yeah.
You didn't use Chance though. We gotta get you an attorney.
Yep. Yeah. So I think you mentioned he might have done this with you, but Samuel was able to school me a little bit on, he gave me a little crash course on zoning and what we can do by right. So this particular property was zoned RM5. So given our lot dimensions and the FAR ratios, all of that, it turned out we could add another unit. But, because I was given the price point and the rehab amount, it was a conventional renovation loan. So like a 203K, but it's a conventional product that requires 15% down. So it was going to be quite a bit of money that I had to put down. So I wanted to feel really confident, and, I trusted Samuel, but I wanted to have the reassurance from zoning that I would be able to add another unit, because that's what was going to make my numbers work. So what we had to do was pursue what's called a zoning advisory opinion. And they require survey, and it's basically just a letter where you tell them, hey, this is what we're planning on doing. Of course, this is all going to be with plans, permits built to code. In your opinion, can we do this? So that coordinating the survey, getting that back, submitting the letter, trying to buy ourselves a little bit of time to get that response from zoning, caused a bit of a delay in the closing process. But luckily, the seller worked with us, and we were able to get to closing a couple months later.
Yeah, one thing to pull out there, R5 zoning is just fantastic, right? Like I put a huge value on that if you happen to find a property that's not an R2 and R3, because then you can do it by right. You're not dealing with going through the alderman. You're not sending letters to the neighbors. It's just a much smoother process. And as you mentioned, Alex, we did that on one of our buildings. And it's just the ease of adding the unit is it's a significant advantage and should be accounted for. You should put some value on that zoning being R5. Mark, what do you got there?
I was for time frame's sake. So we talked about a lot of this with working with Samuel, working with Perry. You left that house that day. How fast did you submit your offer? Like that's, you didn't do all this stuff before the offer. Like, talk to us about kind of time frame, and did all these things happen during attorney review? Did you have your attorney put something specific in the attorney review to allow you to be able to research your zoning? You make sure that your construction finance can go through all that stuff. So take a step back. You left the house that day. Like, how fast?
Yeah, so I'd say I'm blanking on the exact number of days, but I probably, between the time I went there, the GC couldn't go with me. So what I did was take a bunch of pictures and videos, some dimensions, and send him a bunch of information to get me a rehab estimate. So I'd say it was probably 3 to 4 days later that I was able to submit an offer at full asking price, $325. They accepted that. And then at that point, I was able to, once we got into the attorney review, yes, Mark, I had my attorney put in his attorney review that we were wanting the survey up front. We even offered to pay for the $500 fee for the survey, whatever it was, and that we were seeking a zoning advisory opinion, and it would the deal was kind of contingent on what we received from that. And surprisingly, we didn't get a ton of resistance from the other side. I don't know if it was because the seller was more laid back or because it had to do that it was an in-house listing. I'm not sure, but it just ended up working out.
Gotcha. So you mentioned also in there that you found out it was a demo court. Tell the listeners kind of how you found that out. Did you just go to Google up City of Chicago building violations and land on that page, or? Yeah,
so yep. Sorry to cut you off there, but yep, it's exactly that. Just go to, anytime I come across any of these deals, particularly if they say that they're rehab, one of my first steps is to go Google Chicago permit records or inspection records. You type in an address, and then it'll show you there if the property's got any violations or if there haven't been any permits pulled. And in there, it's in the inspection records. That's where I found that there was some demo court activity, which, I kind of had to learn what that was and how all that worked after the fact.
Nice. It's very few. Just for our listeners out there, I couldn't tell you a percentage, but the amount of properties that go into demo court, they actually physically get demoed. It's not as big of a percentage. It's really put in demo court, so people start. It's almost like a high priority level for people to like, hey, if you don't start doing these things for this building, or if you don't start coming to the court, we're going to tear down your building. So,
Mark, quick comment: isn't there a distinction too between the buildings that get a red X put on them versus the ones that don't, as it relates to the demo court? I'm not sure. I thought I had read something before, but
I think it's two different things. The red X is really to warn emergency responders that the inside could be potentially unsafe. So if there's buildings burning down, don't rush in there, or rush in there with caution. Is okay. the red X. Now, majority of the time, those buildings are in demo court, but it really is two different purposes.
Understood.
Look, I want to talk about plans real quick, because when we're adding a unit, so here's what we've done in the past. Let's say it's a 3-unit, you're adding a 4th. We'll submit plans as a 3-unit duplex down, so we can start work on those 3 units right away as we wait for the 4th unit to get approved. Like, I'll pay for 2 sets of plans to save me 60, 90 days of holding costs.
Wow. That's great.
So like, and I know, like, say Samuel's the one who taught me that, and obviously he gets paid twice, so it's great for him. But it works for me as well, right? Like, we can start ASAP as opposed to sitting on that zoning chain. So did you have the attorney review, you get the survey, all the stuff you mentioned happens. What were you doing from the architectural perspective once you found out, okay, we can get this thing done? Did you just wait and submit, or walk us through like what that timeline was?
Yeah, so you're talking about once we closed on it, or prior to closing? Even
prior. Like, did you have drawings, or did you have to wait till closing? Like, talk through like working with the architects. I think that's one that a lot of people are not familiar with.
Yeah. So what I did there, because I was, and in hindsight, it probably would have made sense to do everything you just said to save time and money. But because I was getting the renovation loan that had not only the rehab estimate in there, but I had money for architect fees, and I rolled 6 months of mortgage, a bunch of stuff in there. I was kind of even though I had money, and in hindsight, it would have been smart to just use my own money. I was waiting to close and get that first disbursement to be able to have Samuel get started. Again, in hindsight, and given this, I just learned this new trick of submitting 2 sets of plans. Actually, you mentioned it now, but I saw it on your post this morning on the Facebook group that you did that with your 4 unit. So definitely something I would consider in the future, but I didn't really know about that for this case.
Got it. So you submit, we sit on them. How long was that turnaround from the city? And was there any unexpected delays from them?
Yeah, so there was, to answer your first question of how long was it, we submitted towards the mid to end of September 2020, and we ended up getting approval almost mid-December. So
that's not bad and with the additional unit. Right.
Yep. I mean, I was hoping it was going to be sooner than that. Obviously, as a new investor, just anxiously waiting to get that approval to start. But yeah, that was the time frame. What was your other question? The second part to the question?
So you get the plans done. It's now mid-December. Was there anything that happened between September and December while you're waiting? You couldn't really touch the property. Was there anything else you can do except sit and wait?
Not really. Just kind of be on top of, try to be on top of it, having Samuel follow up with the zoning department and the building department, see if we can get any kind of update. There was a couple of rounds of comments, something about the setbacks of the rear porches, and like having to add a roof over the top porch deck, because then it's considered a porch versus a deck, which messes with the required rear setbacks. Again, just details like that required. It's like, crap, it's just something minor. Now we got to address it and resubmit, and it adds, I don't know, 2-3 weeks depending on their workload. But yeah, no, not a ton we could do except try to be on top of it, respond to their comments, and continue to wait. And then, yeah, that was it.
Let me take a minute to reflect on some emotions here. So you went through a long journey of finding the property. You went through the long journey of closing the property. And now you're in another part of the journey of waiting for the next step. But you accomplished so much at that point. Like, what were you feeling at that point? Did you feel you accomplished anything, or did you feel like kind of a highlight for the people that haven't been there yet? Like what that feeling is like when you're just kind of, after you've accomplished so much at that point, whether you believe it or not, as the investor.
Well, I also, that's a great question. I want to say, what did it feel like having a $300 or whatever $1,000 rehab staring you in the face when you haven't done one?
Yeah.
Like, what was that feeling?
Yeah. So I go back to the phrase I said earlier, which is sort of ignorant fearlessness. I was so anxious to get into a property that I just said, I should say I was fortunate that I had some savings of my own, but I also had personal loans from my parents that would allow me to sort of put the type of down payment that I put, but also weather a storm if it were to go wrong like it did, which we're going to get into shortly. That sort of allowed me to be, in hindsight, I should have been more scared than I was, honestly. I was just excited. I was very green. I'm like, I'm moving forward here. But yes, there were big milestones. Like, closing took 2.5 months. So when we closed, I'm like, I'm a homeowner. I was super duper happy and relieved that we were able to get through all the demo court and got the zoning advisory opinion. But that was just one milestone. Then I'm like, crap, now we got to get these plans approved. And even though I have the zoning advisory opinion in there, they say, this is not a guarantee that we're going to approve your plans. All this is subject to review. And then they came back with all the comments. So it was, a lot of sort of anxiety during that phase. And then once we finally got the plans approved December of last year, that was a huge moment of relief as well. In hindsight, it shouldn't necessarily have been, because there's still a whole $300K rehab to complete. But in my eyes, it was. And I'm like, at least, I can do this. Now I know for sure I can do this. So yeah, it was just a mix of emotions, lots of anxiety, happy when hitting the milestones, but just had to continue to move forward on to the next thing.
Love it. So you mentioned things go wrong. Let's talk through it here. We start our rehab and give our listeners some of the obstacles we faced here.
Yeah. So again, we got those plans approved in December. We started with some outside work before the weather turned for the worst. They had to dig up the backyard to pour a concrete slab back there. There was no garage. But I guess in short, the issue was with the GC. So kind of like everybody hears, be careful when you're picking a GC. From the beginning, he's like, he was telling me, we're going to get, I would just try to get him on a schedule. Hey, what milestones are we going to hit by X, Y, and Z date? He would tell me, and from the jump, we weren't hitting those, and there was always excuses, or, this person didn't show up. And honestly, I think I kind of tolerated that longer than I should have, because I went basically from mid-December up through probably end of February. So a solid 2.5 to 3 months or so before we finally, kind of parted ways with the GC. And I say, I phrase it as parted ways. I technically didn't even fire him. It was like a mutual type of agreement that, we should probably part ways. So yeah, I guess that's a little tip when you're to the listeners, if you ever get into something like this, just like, I'm not saying have a super duper short leash, but I mean, I think I waited too long. I think, had I, after noticing after a month and a half that he wasn't performing, I should have started considering other options and probably fired him at that point. Yeah, it just got to a point where I started, he basically didn't have funds he couldn't fund the project. So I started stepping in with the reserves I have and saying, hey, well, as long as I can get reimbursed by the bank, he would sign a change order saying that, I paid for X material or I paid for X labor. So when it came time for the bank to do a draw inspection, I would get reimbursed. But basically, he was just like a middleman at that point. He wasn't really funding the project. I was even starting to bring in my own guys when he didn't, to do some of like the side work, obviously not the trades, but
how did you had an agreement with this guy? How was like the terms of payment? And I do think you keep a short lease. You just have to understand that it's never going to be perfect. Like the short leash is good, so they know that you're on top of them. But how would you be paying them just on milestones based on the job, or was it dates? Like, talk to us about kind of how you laid out the contract with this initial guy that failed.
Yeah, so this initial guy, so the way it works with these, at least this particular loan I got was that at closing, so even before getting the plans approved, because keep in mind, there was a 2.5 to 3 month stretch between when we closed and when we got the plans approved and work could technically start. So at closing, he was able to get up to 10% of the rehab amount, basically the contingency at closing. And at that point, that was in theory enough money for him to kind of fund the project along with his working capital to then get to the milestones of the draw inspection. So basically he had, the loan included 3 draw inspections and then a final. So basically when he completed enough work where he saw, okay, we've made good progress here, we would schedule a draw inspection, and that's how he would get compensated. In theory, I wasn't supposed to be paying anything.
Ooh. Listen, I've I don't know, you chime in here, Tom. I've never had a project work out like that. I mean, we shifted early on to labor only contracts, and we control the material just because we wanted to be able to give us that short leash is paying them out in shorter intervals, less amount. So they keep coming back. That mentality, as you've learned, it's usually a couple week mentality of cash flow. And once you get beyond that, then you lose a lot with them. So
you lose leverage, and it's just, if you want to scale and do multiple projects at a time, it gets insanely capital intensive. Like if you're it's a little different in my situation because the trust Chris and I have together. Like I front more than most people should, but it's a different story. If you're doing a first project, you should not model it the way I do it. But you get out, it's capital intensive, right? Like if let's say you are going to take the route that you said and buy the materials and so forth, you're not getting reimbursed for that until it's installed, or you might get a partial waiver for it, but like you're still going to have that time where you are out of pocket. So if you think I just need this amount of money to get a deal done, it's absolutely incorrect. You got to pay all the holding costs. You will be fronting something. There's going to be change orders. Like you almost need, 2-3x of what you think you need every single time. Like it is what it is.
Yep. I just want to add a quick comment here that I think will be helpful to the listeners. So again, going back to that 10% at closing, initially, I think I had only, when I signed when we ran our final closing, when I signed the final closing papers, I did such that he was only going to get like 3% of the contingency because the property was basically already demoed. There was some cleanup to do, but there was really no reason for him to have that much money at the front end. And then after, I actually kind of in ignorance, I called him during the time. I'm like, hey, I'm going to set to confirm the contingency or the upfront amount with him, thinking that he was going to be like, yeah, just give me the least amount as possible. Of course, he was going to push for the most. He didn't answer when I called him. So I went with 3%. And then it was after the fact, after we had done this, and he only got the 3% of the contingency, that he pushed for, hey, can I get the 10? This is necessary for booking some of the subs. They take deposits, all this type of stuff. And in hindsight, I think if you're working with any GC worth his salt, he needs to have working capital to be able to pay for that type of stuff. It shouldn't fall on you. So I don't know. And to me, that was a red flag that, moving forward, I wouldn't have handled that situation that way. So yeah, I just wanted to add that in there.
Think about this. So contractors, I know you got a comment, Tom. They need money to pay their guys for that week, and they need money for material they buy that day. Other than that, and most contractors don't plan either one of those things further out than a few days. So, and the ones that are really good that do those things. So no knock on everybody. More than likely, they're going to be too expensive for you to hire them, and they're not doing the type of stuff that we're doing. So I just kind of food for thought there of where that money actually goes and when it's utilized in a contractor's life cycle.
Yep. You mentioned red flags, Alex. I want to get to how you got out of this and move forward. Before we do that, was there in Monday Morning Quarterback, were there any other red flags? Like during the due diligence phase, when you vetted this guy, looking back at it, you said, damn it, like I should have caught that.
Did you find him on Craigslist?
No.
Okay, just make sure.
Yeah, no, I just found them online, not on Craigslist. I came across his license on BuildZoom, and I looked at the permit records, as I said, the permit records. I saw that he was on a couple projects. And yeah, I guess here's another tip. Like I would just obviously vet better. All I did was, he seemed like a trustworthy guy. Prior to this property, he had come out to like 3 properties with me to walk them with me and provide an estimate. I tried paying him for his time, and he said, no, just keep me in mind when you do get something under contract. So he just seemed very well-intentioned. I ended up going to one of his jobs it was a house. It wasn't a new construction, but he basically rebuilt a house, and the work looked pretty solid. And for me, at the time, that was enough to say, oh yeah, I can move forward with this guy. Again, in hindsight, that was a mistake. I would have definitely tried to have gone to at least a couple more job sites. I definitely would have gotten in touch with some of his referrals, some of his clients. I didn't talk to anybody who had worked with him before. I just kind of, again, based off that limited due diligence, kind of moved forward, and it was a big mistake at the end of the day.
One more comment though before we move on, because I think it's valuable. I was talking about this the other day with somebody, I think it was Ryan, but there's 2 different type of contractors. There's the contractors that can do permit work and do these large projects, and there's just contractors that might be just kind of going in and doing a heavy turnover for you that aren't getting permits. And there's really 2 different mentalities. Some guys can bridge both sides, but you usually try to hire one or the other based on if you're getting permits or not.
Yep.
Yeah, good point. All right. So you part ways with this guy. You're left here in the middle of a rehab. Obviously probably not feeling awesome. How do you dig out of this? Like, what were the next steps of action? And talk a little about just like, did you throw yourself a pity party for 2 days? Just the mental part of this as well.
Yeah, so obviously mentally it was draining. Tom, I know I had a couple conversations with you regarding like, what would you do in my shoes, throughout all the process before finally parting ways with this guy. But once I did part ways with him, I was basically working with another GC who had initially bid the job. And of course, he was more expensive. He seemed like he also, seemed to be good, which is why I invited him to come give me a bid. But I went with the original GC who was cheaper. And it's another lesson. I just quite simply, it's expensive to be cheap. This is a cheaper price guy, and I paid for it in the long run. But
question. I got a question. So if you lined those two guys up together and they're the same bid, which one would you have taken?
I mean, honestly, because the original GC that I fired, because of his willingness to me, I kind of judged it from like a personality standpoint. He came out with me to all those other job sites. He seemed to be in my corner and willing to support what I was trying to do here. So even if they were the same, honestly, if I'm being honest, I probably still would have ended up going with the other guy. Again, just don't judge a book by its cover, I guess. It was just a bad judgment on my end, thinking that he was trustworthy just because he seemed like it.
Good stuff. So we call this the other GC back. Talk about like, there's a lot that has to happen here, right? He's got to say, hey, this works. Like, I know like when we've taken over other people's jobs, Chris is like, no, we got to rip this out, right? Like, we're not just going to accept it as is and plow forward. Was there anything that had to be redone? And then was there any complications with the lender? Because I'm assuming the draws were being made out to the original GC's name.
Right. Yep, they definitely were. So in terms of on that front, we had to go through the permit process of switching GCs and all the trades folks. So we took care of that. And then there was some paperwork. It wasn't too bad, honestly, but there was some paperwork with the bank. I had to submit a letter showing that we mutually parted ways with my previous GC, and that nothing is owed to him. And then the new GC had to provide the license and insurance and all that good stuff. And then, for this new GC who had originally gave me a bid, his pricing was a little more expensive because there was actually not a ton to rip out. But honestly, a big part of the reason why the pricing was more expensive because between May and June of 2020 compared to March of this year, as we all know, material skyrocketed. So that was in part why his cost was a bit higher, and also taking over a project that had already been started. But I was honestly at that point, going back to the mental state, I was at a point of desperation. I needed somebody to get me to the finish line. So yeah, that was sort of the process and how I ended up switching over.
Got it. So we make this switch. Talk us through, like, I want to get to like the appraisal here, but before that, any other snafus, any other problems with the city, anything else that we're a little over budget, but besides that portion of it, anything else getting thrown at you? The usual bums, criminals, etc.
No, not. I was fortunate in that I didn't have really anything like that. I did get a scare once. This was kind of towards the end of the project, but as my GCs as my workers were wrapping up for the day, towards the end of the project, my GC called me telling me that there was, somebody, might have been a homeless, I'm not sure, but just some suspicious looking person, like going up and down my rear decks because it wasn't fenced off. I'm kind of looking through the windows. It didn't look like he was up to any good. I did have an ADT system on there. I actually did drive over there just to kind of take a peek because I wasn't too far from it at the time. But aside from that, nothing, no other major issues aside from what we've discussed.
Okay. Cool. All right. So we get to the finish line with the rehab. What were you expecting for an appraisal, and what did you end up getting?
Yeah. So when I originally underwrote this deal, I was projecting a 650, 660 ARV. And I'm actually about to close on a cash out refi to require some of the capital that I put in here. Of course, I'm not going to nearly recover all of it because of the amount I went over budget, but it appraised at 770.
Yeah, that's nice. Everyone complains about the material costs going up. No one talks about ARVs going up 10, 15% on these bigger properties.
That's been a savior. Yeah, definitely. I overspent a ton, and it didn't go up enough to make for everything extra I had to put into it. But it's nice to have that little bit of a cushion now from an equity perspective. So yeah, that was nice.
Yeah, and it also goes to show, like, man, like, I forgot who said it. It might have been 𝗦𝘃𝗶𝗵𝗵𝗁, the last one. Like, you got to fall in love with the building.
Yep.
These things will change. The value on this building is what it is today. It went up for you, great. It could go down. It can go up again. Like, but at the end of the day, though, these long-term buy and holds, do you love the building? Is it an area you can execute on and operate? Like, there's just so much more that goes into it instead of that original cash-on-cash return.
Hey,
right.
Kudos to 𝗦𝘃𝗶𝗵𝗵. I actually, this morning, somebody called me about a building there on the fence. I said, do you love the building? So
it's gonna be my new thing.
I've used it. I'm gonna take that from him all day.
So, and I do want, for our listeners out there, we probably won't show like the listings, the address and whatnot, but like we will get some pictures because it's a nice rehab. It's a very nice looking building. You guys got the nice deck out there. It's a solid looking building, and that you were going to hold long term now. So like you took some lumps here. You got a tailwind from the market that kind of offset a good amount of the rehab. You went over. We're here. You own this thing. It's got to feel good to get to a stabilized state. We're getting tenants in there. Knowing everything that would you do this all over again? No, if you had the chance to go back in time and say, you know what, screw it, I shouldn't have done this at all. Would you punt, or would you go through what you went through?
I mean, I think I would do it all over again. Of course, I wish that I had the knowledge that I have now to do it all over again. But in the end, I think I'm in a better place now than I would be otherwise. I've just learned a ton about all facets of, the rehab process and investing. I've placed tenants in there. I mean, I saw the house completely gutted. I know everything and anything that went into the house. Even though for these first few years here, I'm going to be sort of, my cash flow is going to go to paying back the personal loans that I had alluded to that were required to weather the storm of the rehab. In the end, I view it as, you can go and buy an older building that's had some work done maybe, or no work done in a while, and you're going to be putting money into it regardless. Maybe not as much as giving away all your cash flow, but the way I view it is like, okay, I'm going to sacrifice the first couple years of cash flow to pay off my loans. And, in the end, I'm still going to get all the other benefits of principal pay down and appreciation and the tax benefits. And it's just, but above all that, everything I learned, I think that's almost invaluable. So yes, I would definitely do it again. And I'd encourage anybody who's going to do this for the first time to, just really talk to somebody who has done it before, and, just really do your research up front. Don't be as fearless as I was. I wouldn't recommend that, but definitely put your time in at the beginning to really mitigate your risk.
I think most of us on here, entrepreneurs, go in it with that fearless piece. So I think that's kind of part of the makeup of us. But I'll say this: what you learned in this period of time of this project was far more than you could read or learn if you were on BiggerPockets for the next 10 years. And I asked the question before how you felt at a certain point. there's so many decisions you're making, so many big decisions they're making, in the actual going forward and doing it. But so many decisions are all tied into all these feelings that are flowing through you. And you can't get that from reading. You can't get that probably even from listening to us on this call today. But you just so much feelings mixed with so many decisions, so much is riding on it that, man, you just learn so much doing a deal versus just reading about it somewhere else.
Yep.
Yeah,
Definitely.
so much I want to pull out there. Absolutely everything Mark said. But another thing that you mentioned, you have a brand new building here, right? A lot of times people don't do that. Just because you don't put the roof in the rehab doesn't mean it disappears. Just because you defer a problem doesn't mean it's not hanging over your head, right? There's a value to, even though the rehab was higher, the building is now, I don't want to say set. There's always maintenance. It's still a 100-year-old building. But like those CapEx being taken up front, like we put a huge value on that, whether the seller did it recently or we do it up front in our budget. The other thing too is like, Mark, how many of our listeners do you think have taken on a 300K rehab?
Not many, and not many in the first round either. So like,
that's what I'm saying. There's just so much knowledge there. Like if you want to get to a point where you're buying something bigger, when you're making all cash offers on big buildings, you got to start at some point. You got to do it. Maybe not in your first one, but like, you have to go through that learning process, right? And at the end of the day, you end up with a beautiful building, right? Like there's so much silver lining here. I don't want people to be over aggressive or just go out and buy anything, but man, there's so many intangibles here that I hope everyone understands, because
you do learn a lot. You do learn a lot more on a multi-unit than you do a single family as well too. I think there's so much more just how the units are tied together, the plumbing systems, the chase walls. There's just so much more you learn when you get a larger building than a single family.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Alex, awesome stuff. We're gonna wrap here. Before we do, anything else that we missed on this building? Anything else you want to add?
I think, I wanted to take the approach here of just like kind of the question you've already asked. What advice would I give to somebody who's taking on a project like this? We've talked about, talk to somebody who has done it. We've talked about, it's expensive to be cheap. Don't go with the cheapest guy. Do your due diligence, all that. One of the things that I am kicking myself over that I did was just be honest with yourself. Don't try to make the numbers artificially low. So especially on a loan like this, where you're putting a down payment, even if you do an FHA 203K, you're putting a low down payment on the overall cost. Don't skimp on, like I've got a 8-year-old roof that, should be good for another 7 years. Like if you think you're going to need to replace that sooner than later, just do it, because they're going to let you borrow the money anyway. And then if you don't do it, you're going to have to come out of pocket anyway. I know that's not going to make your equity spread look as nice as it would otherwise, but it's worth it. I mean, in this example, one of my particular building, I wanted, because it was a limestone building and I wanted it to have nice curb appeal. I knew I wanted black windows because that's what's in right now. And in order to save some bucks, my old GC told me that, these kind of lower grade 6-year-old vinyl windows that it has, we can just paint them black. And after talking to some people, it turned out that was going to be a maintenance nightmare, and they weren't the highest quality windows anyway, and that might not be the best idea to paint them black. Well, because I wanted my numbers to look nicer, I ended up not putting the windows in the rehab estimate, and then later had to pay for 27 windows to be installed out of pocket when I could have borrowed that put that in the rehab estimate. So things like that, like I wish I wouldn't have tried to make the numbers look as nice as I did at the beginning, because now I'm kicking myself over that.
Yeah, great advice there. Hey, one last comment I want to add, because we didn't explicitly call it out, but if you're doing a deal and you get in trouble, call people, right? You mentioned that, like you talked to me, call Mark, call Ryan Smith, call any of our guests that we've had on. Like, people are willing to help. You need a GC, call RJ or Clem. Like there's a million people out here that will help you when you're in a jam. Like, right? Like, don't just sit there and fret about it and lose sleep overnight. Start talking to people. Yep. And have conversations. You'll just mentally feel better. And 2, you'll start to get some experience. You'll get the byproduct of their experience on, all right, this is what you should do next.
Yep.
So awesome stuff, Alex. This is great info. Mark, we ready to wrap this thing?
Ready to wrap. All right. You ready?
Let's do this.
All right. What's your competitive advantage? How have you been able to get up and take action? What's it about you that allowed you to take action versus other people that wish they could?
Yeah, I think my competitive advantage is that I've always had this I just choose that I decide I'm going to do something and I just kind of focus on that. And sometimes it could be to a detriment. In this case, like I'm going to get a building. I don't care that it's a gut rehab. I'm going to do it. And I did it. It didn't go as planned, but I did it. So I think that's a competitive advantage. I get pretty passionate when I decide to do something. In this particular case, I just put a lot of time and effort and passion into this job. I think overall, as another little tip is, don't, especially for these buy and hold properties, this is not a flip. You're not going to get rid of it. This is going to be your building for the long haul. So I would say, put the time and effort to, how are you going to make this a quality product? How are you going to make it a nice space, a desirable space for somebody to live in? I feel like there's people on the podcast who have said something along these lines, but spend the extra money for the nicer light fixtures or the nicer countertops, or, just do things right. Pay for the quality product, because your tenants will notice it. You'll be able to attract a higher quality tenant. You'll be able to charge more rent. I'm not advocating unreasonably over improving, but I am saying that, take the time to make this a nice space, so you have a pride of ownership building.
Love it. Alex, you've already dropped a lot of advice, but what is one piece of advice you would tell someone that is yet to buy their first property here in Chicago?
Yep. There's so many, right? We've already talked a ton about some of the pointers I would give to somebody in this position, but just generally speaking, I would say it's super important to really, there's this guy on YouTube who I listen to. His name's Michael Zuber, one rental at a time. He talks a lot about defining your buy box. So especially in Chicago, it's a major metropolis, huge city with all kinds of submarkets. So if you're looking for a 2-unit in West Humboldt Park, north of Grand, south of North Avenue, west of the park, whatever it is, stick to that area and walk the properties. It's good to walk any properties, but particularly walk those properties, be on an MLS search, look at what's coming up, because then you'll be able to you'll recognize where there's value when it shows up, much better than if your focus is just kind of scattered all over the place. And in addition to that, I just say, everybody says this, but, have a good team. And it's not hard to do that. Just I think like rock stars roll with rock stars, right? So if you find a good real estate agent or a good lender, they're going to know a good lender, a good attorney. So it's not, I think you guys have said hijack a team, if people, it's not hard to do that. These people want to help you. So with you really focusing in, you'll be able to move forward from a position of confidence, and then you'll have a good team to back you.
You took my comment. I was going to drop the hijack your team line.
Yep.
Awesome. Good. You listen.
We're going to get t-shirts that say hijacking teams since 2020. Yep.
I love it. So, all right. What do you do for fun?
So over the last year, there hasn't been too much fun, honestly. Not thrilled about the amount of grays I have in my beard now over this last year, but generally speaking, so my girlfriend is house hacking a property here in West Humboldt, just like 2 blocks west of the park. So in the summer, we spend a bunch of time biking up and down the park, the 606. We're hanging around Logan a lot, farmers market, coffee shops. And then as the weather gets cold here, we're just pretty normal. We enjoy we enjoy some good dining and drinking. So you'll find us at any of the, amazing restaurants, bars that Chicago has to offer.
Nice.
What is a good book, podcast, or self-development activity you would recommend to our listeners?
Okay, so I'm not as good of a reader as I'd like to be better at reading, but I did recently start Atomic Habits by James Clear.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. I haven't finished it. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to get into the habit required to finish the damn book, but I'm working on that. And overall, self-development wise, I'm a big fan. He's not real estate, but just general advice. Jordan Peterson on YouTube. Any lectures he puts out, I just really resonate with his message and feel good about, him talking about taking responsibility for your life and, aiming for something worthwhile. If he's trying to do something good for for, the people around you in your community type of thing. And I think, with us through investing, and of course it's not 100% altruistic. We're trying to make some money, but we're also trying to provide good, improved communities, give people nice places to live. So Jordan Peterson would be another guy who I'd highly recommend for anybody who hasn't listened.
Like them both. Atomic Habits, all about habit stacking. Every time you go to brush your teeth, read 3 pages of the book, and then before you know it, you'll be done with the book.
Yep.
All right. Besides yourself, name one person in your local network you'd highly recommend to other investors as a quality resource.
Right. So, I've dropped a couple people, my lender on this project, 𝗤𝗃𝗏𝗏, my architect, 𝗬𝗵𝗶𝗵𝗁, who were previous guests. Somebody different who I'd recommend who helped me out throughout this process would be the HUD consultant. Even though this wasn't a 203K, and I guess his role here was my draw inspector, and he was working with the GC on other projects, and the GC was kind of pulling some of the fast stuff he was trying to pull with me, and he kind of saved me from potentially dispersing money that I shouldn't have, and this guy was trying to get ahead of money. So my HUD consultant, his name's 𝗫𝗃𝗃𝗀𝗃. He's with Home Inspection Pros Inc. So he's an inspector and a 203K consultant. So 𝗫𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗀𝗃, for any of you guys, need an inspector, 203K consultant, hit him up.
Nice.
Yeah, it's a good one. We haven't had that. Let's get him on for a Tuesday tip.
Yeah.
All right. So Alex, awesome episode. Appreciate it. You provide a ton of value to our listeners. How can they learn more about you? Is there any way they can provide value to you?
Yeah, so how they could learn more about me, I'm on the Straight Up Chicago Investor Facebook group. So if they were to look up my name, they'll find me on there. I could provide you guys with my email, so we could put it in the show notes if that's okay with you guys. So yeah, that's how they could reach out to me if they have any questions. Happy to help guide anybody who's just starting out or with anything at all. And how they could provide value to me. Let's see here. That's tough. I'd say that if we happen to, as long as they're open to having a conversation about their experiences, I'm just happy to have a conversation. If I'm in this Discord group with Windy City REI, I know you guys know of them, and it's nice. People share resources. There's meetups. So just sharing your resources. We're all here to. Sharing is caring, right? So we're all here to just kind of share resources, and that's what I would say.
Love it. Shout out to Windy City REI. I think it's the last Sunday of each month, but they're on the webpage for our events. But I know Alex, Chris, and others who put that together. Really, really solid stuff, especially if you're just getting started as well. So check them out. All right, Mark. I think let's see if this one's doable. So we're near the United Center, so I'm going to give you a question about the United Center here. So. It opened across the street from Chicago Stadium in 1994. Then they demolished the old one. But the first event ever held there was A, a Blackhawks charity event, B, a Billy Joel inaugural concert, C, Chicago Bulls preseason game honoring the 93 championship, or D, a $1,000 plate black tie gala.
D, the black tie gala.
Alex, you want to throw a guest in?
I'd guess the Bulls celebrating the 1993 championship.
No, I put that in there to trip Mark up, but he didn't fall for it. He didn't take the bait. It's D. Nice work, Mark.
Nice.
I tried to make it uber specific.
And I uber guessed that. But I sounded confident, right? I sounded confident. I had no clue.
Sound confident. I guess it makes sense. Like, let's raise money before we have an event.
It just, I don't know. It seemed trying to hack multiple choice questions. That's what I went with. All right, cool. Awesome, man. Alex, great show. Great experience. Hopefully we'll have you back on here again with more experiences and more positive ones as well too. So Tom, thank you as always. Listeners, if you guys have other guests, if you have experiences that you want to share that you think you can add value to our listeners, let us know. We love having all walks of life on our show that can add value to all of our listeners. So if you know a good guest, if you think you're a good guest, reach out to us. You got the Ask Mark and Tom page on the website at straightupchicagoinvestor.com. Tom, thank you again. Alex, thank you. And everyone, we'll see you soon.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks all.